and he has worked for different ministries on national projects on language assessment, and also with the European Commission on the European Survey on language competencies, which is what he's going to talk about now. Martin.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Martin Robinson from Cambridge English. I'm going to be talking about the European Survey on Language Competences. I hope you don't mind if I stand up rather than sit down. I'm an ex-teacher, so I'm more used to standing up and waving my arms around. Okay, how many people have heard of the European Survey on Language Competences? Okay, quite a few, that's good. But enough people don't know about it to make it worthwhile me saying something, yeah? So I have a good reason for being here. Okay, so what was the European Survey? So the European Survey on Language Competences was a survey that tested language competence in schools across Europe. And that's foreign language competence, not first language, so it's foreign language competence. And in schools right across Europe. And we tested the two most widely taught foreign languages in each country. And that would have been different for each participating country. So, for example, I'm from England. The most widely taught foreign language in England is French. Okay? And the second most widely taught foreign language in England is, what people saying, Spanish? I thought it was going to be Spanish. I did French and Spanish at school. My 15-year-old son is now doing French and Spanish at school, but actually it's still, or it was at the time of the survey, German. Yeah. I think Spanish is rapidly catching up, and it may have already overtaken German, but I think very soon it will do. Spanish is very popular. Okay, and in Spain, the most commonly taught foreign language is English, and the second most commonly taught foreign language is French. Okay. And Spanish as a foreign language in other countries was taught as one of the two most commonly taught foreign languages in two of the participating countries. Can you name the two participating countries that teach Spanish as one of the two most commonly taught foreign languages? France. France is one. France is a neighbouring country. The other one is not a neighbouring country, but there are a lot of Spanish teachers who go to live in that country to teach Spanish. Sweden. Okay. And who's tested it? It was students in the final year of lower secondary. So that's the end of compulsory education, so around 15, 16-year-old students. The survey took place in 2008 to 2012, so we kicked off in 2008. We spent a couple of years preparing all the tests, all the instruments, doing the sampling, and the field trial, first kind of big practice, took place in 2010. The actual survey itself took place in 2011, and the report and all the results were published in 2012. And the survey was done on behalf of, it was paid for and commissioned by the European Commission, on behalf of the Council of Europe. And it was part of the Language Indicators project. So there have been a number of other language indicators, and this was one of them. Okay. Sometimes the European Survey is called the SurveyLang project. SurveyLang was actually the group of organisations, the consortium, that put together the project. So Cambridge English managed the whole project. We created the English language tests, and we also coordinated the production of the tests across the 5 languages. CIEP in France were responsible for the French language tests, the Goethe Institute in Germany for the German language tests, the University of Perugia in Italy for the Italian language tests, the University of Salamanca and the Instituto Cervantes in Spain for the Spanish. Anybody here from the University of Salamanca? Or Salamanca? Oh, yes. Okay. You did a great job. Okay, and Gallup in Europe were responsible for the sampling, creating the testing tool. The survey was done both paper-based and computer-based, so we had to develop a computer-based delivery platform, and the translation. There was a huge amount of translation. And CITO in the Netherlands were responsible for questionnaire design and the analysis. As well as the consortium that put together the survey, we had in-country partners. So in every country there was what we call the National Research Centre, who were responsible for coordinating the whole survey on behalf of their national government. In Spain, that was the INEE, the National Institute of Educational Assessment, who are with us tonight. And they did a fantastic job in organising the whole thing. Every country had to organise the whole event over the 4 years, and it was a huge amount of work. Okay, so the key aims for the European Commission: firstly, to provide information on the level of foreign language knowledge. That should really be competence. We were not asking what people know, but actually what people can do in the language. So really that should read competence, really, of students across Europe. And importantly, to provide strategic information to policymakers, teachers and learners. So we didn't want to just find out what level people were in their language. We wanted to learn from the good countries. We wanted to make it so that we can learn best practice from the countries who do it well. Okay, and who was tested? So it was over 50,000 students, over 2,000 schools, in 14 countries, 16 entities. Not every country participated. This project started in 2008, and this was just the beginning, just around the time of the economic crisis in Europe. And each country had to pay a substantial amount to participate. And some countries, unfortunately, because of the economic crisis, were not able to participate. The reason it's 16 entities and not much more entities than countries is that in Belgium, the different regions in Belgium, French, Flemish, etc., they had their own kind of pair of foreign languages, so they did it differently. Okay, as I've mentioned, it's the two most commonly taught foreign languages per country. Students at the end of lower secondary, so 15, 16-year-olds, in some countries that's 17-year-olds. There are around 1,500 students tested per country, per language. So that's around 3,000 students in each country. And it was a representative sample. So it took a couple of years to actually to do the sampling, to make sure that each country wasn't just putting forward their own best students, or their own best schools. So actually what this involved for the organisation in the country was listing every single school in the country that taught those two foreign languages, and then within those schools listing every student that studied those languages. So they first sampled from all the schools and then sampled students within the schools. So it was a representative sample within each country. Okay, and the instruments that we used, of course, language tests. We created tests in English, French, German, Italian and Spanish. We tested 3 skills, so reading, listening and writing. It was decided right at the beginning of the project by the Commission and all the participating countries that it wasn't practical at that time to test speaking. Everybody wanted to test speaking, but it just wasn't practical really. It was to do face-to-face speaking would have cost a lot, would have taken a lot of time. So they decided not to, and to do it in a following survey, unfortunately. The levels tested were A1 to B2. Is everyone familiar with the CFR and the levels of the CFR? So A1 is the lowest level, So the levels go A1, A2, which is kind of basic language level. The B levels, B1 and B2, which is kind of independent level. And then the higher levels, C1 and C2, which is where people begin to master the language. We couldn't test all the levels and all the students, so we decided to limit it at B2. So where we report B2 levels later on, that actually means B2 or above. Some of those students would have been above B2. Okay. And we created contextual questionnaires for students, teachers, heads of schools and countries. This was the most important part, so we could easily test language levels, but we wanted to ask the students, for example, what they do at home with regard to language. Do they use English with their friends on the internet? Do they watch TV? Do they watch films in English? Do they go on holiday and use English? What books do they have in their houses, etc. The same with teachers. We wanted to ask them, what do they do in class? Do they mainly use English? Do they mainly use first language? Is it communicative teaching, etc.? We wanted to get as much information as possible so that we could link that information to the test results. Importantly, the results had to be comparable across the 5 languages and all participating countries. This was quite a challenge because, as you can imagine, language tests that currently exist around Europe in all of our countries would not produce results that were comparable. So, for example, the test we have in England for testing French and German, you could not compare those results with any national tests in, for example, Spain or France testing English, or in another country testing German. Those language tests are not comparable in any way. So we created language tests by working together very closely across the 5 countries to create tests that actually, where you say somebody is A2 in French, it means they have the same competency as when we say somebody has A2 level in English or German. And we were quite sure of that. Okay, so the test delivery. So as I've mentioned, we did reading, listening and writing. We tested at 3 levels. So we didn't just give all of the students all of the questions, because that would have been demotivating. It would have meant low-level students getting questions that they just can't understand and guessing. It would have meant better students getting very easy questions. They would have thought that was a waste of their time. It was demotivating. So we created tests at 3 broad levels, kind of lower level, medium level, higher level. We had to make the tests as short as possible. Otherwise it's demotivating, students turn off, we don't get good results. So what we did is every student took 2 skills out of the 3 with the questionnaire. So not all students did reading, listening and writing. Some did reading, listening, others did listening and writing. The listening were common items we could link across. So with a link design, every single student in every country had their own individual test. Okay, the results. What I'm going to show you now is it's quite a complicated table of results. Before I do that, what it does is kind of put countries, this is not what we set out to do, but the way it ended up is put countries in kind of rank order. So with foreign language competence, can you guess who might be at the lower end? Which country or countries are not so good at foreign languages, do you think? England. Which countries do you think might be at the higher end? Sweden, yes. Netherlands, yes. Okay. Okay, so I realise. Okay, it's quite a complicated table, I can imagine. Each column is one country. So the countries there at the bottom. So you have UK, England there on the left, France, and at the top there you have Sweden, Malta, Netherlands. Underneath that is the language that was the most widely taught foreign language. Okay? The color coding, we have B2, the highest level, is the darker colors at the top. The lowest level, so below A1, are the colors at the bottom here. Okay? So you can see a country like Sweden here has a lot in the higher levels. And remember, that's B2 or above. So many of those students could be C1 or C2. But we weren't testing, so we couldn't distinguish between B1 and B2 and C1 or C2. So that's B2 or above. Okay. This is Spain. And Spain's first language is English. So you can see the number of students there at each level. In summary, there's approximately 30% of students were at B1 or above. B1 is at kind of independent level. But 70% of students are A2 or below. And approximately 20% are not actually reaching A1. That level, by the way, in England is 30%. Over 30% of students are not reaching even A1 in their first foreign language. Okay, the second table is the second language. Okay, so this is the second most widely taught language. This is where Spanish is taught as a foreign language. So in France and in Sweden. Now the one in Sweden is a very interesting one. Sweden are top of the first language. And lots of people, myself included, it's very easy to say the Swedes are excellent at foreign languages. Actually, the data shows that's not true. They're excellent at English as a foreign language, but actually, so the top of the table in English, they're actually bottom of the table in Spanish. So it doesn't mean that they're genetically good at foreign languages. The data is actually showing us that they have put in place the right environment to learn English very well. And maybe they haven't done that yet for Spanish. So it doesn't, the data's shown that, yeah, it's quite interesting. It doesn't mean that the Swedes are excellent at foreign languages. Okay. So in summary, the learning of Spanish in other countries, so approximately 10% are B1 or above, so 90% A2 or below, and approximately 20% again below A1. Okay. But language levels are only part of it. What we really wanted to do was provide strategic information to policymakers, teachers and learners. We want to learn from the good countries. So where they have high performance levels, what can we learn from those countries and take to other countries? So these are some of the conclusions. Languages, I'm not just talking about English, languages in general, foreign languages are learnt better where learning the language is started earlier. Where language learning is actually encouraged. It's not just another school subject, it's encouraged as a language. Where learners perceive it to be useful. And interestingly, there was a positive relation between classical languages and good performance in modern languages. So even in an environment where they're encouraging students to learn classical, Latin, Greek, etc., that had a positive relationship in the statistics with good performance. And in all of those cases, obviously, where motivation is high. So languages are learnt better in a language-friendly, living and learning environment where different languages are heard and seen, where speakers of all languages feel welcome, where parents have knowledge of the same language. That doesn't mean that the parents speak really well and they can practice. It just means that they have knowledge and they encourage their kids. Languages are learnt better in a language-friendly living and learning environment where the languages are used outside school. So, for example, in communicating over the internet, watching TV. Interestingly, in Sweden, very young kids even, the cartoons, like Disney cartoons in English, they leave them in English. They're not dubbed, they're not subtitled, they're left in English for young kids. And travelling on holiday. Students are exposed to language through the media, and films are subtitled, not dubbed. Okay. So what were the achievements of the survey? The real achievement is to provide hard evidence. Some of the things I've said, you could say, well, that's obvious. But actually, we provided evidence for these. So if people are going to invest money on reform, educational reform, they'll generally only do that where they have evidence of either the current situation or how people can progress. Evidence is really important. We created the most comparable set of language testing instruments yet developed. And we created a simple and intuitive recipe for success. So language is learnt better where motivation is high, where learners perceive it to be useful, and where it is used outside school. And within school, the more teachers and students use the language in class, the better it is learned. Some limitations of the study. It was expensive. Some countries didn't participate. It was time consuming. 4 years is a long time to get data like that. It's very hard work. There was no test of speaking, and there was limited feedback from the tests. So a lot of questionnaire feedback, but limited on the tests. So what might future surveys do? Well, they're probably going to be digital. They should include speaking. They should include more detailed, formative feedback on performance. So not just saying that somebody's good or bad at writing, but are they good at communicative writing? Are they good at, is it the grammar or the analysis, or is it discourse, etc. You can give more formative feedback which will help teachers improve the performance of their students. They should be quicker, cheaper and easier to administer, and they should be more localized. We shouldn't have to wait for a big international survey in order to get some data for your region. Okay, some conclusions. Language competences still need to be significantly improved right across Europe. That's very true in the UK, but also in lots of other countries. There is rich potential for peer learning in language policy and learning. As we've seen here, there's a huge amount of data coming from the countries that do it really well. And that data, that information can be passed on to other countries who are still improving. And this can be from country to country. It can also be within a country, region to region, and even from school to school, and even from teacher to teacher. There's an awful lot to be learned from somebody who's doing it very well. A language policy to take Europe forward should place communication and intercultural competence at its centre. And finally, something maybe quite obvious, but I think it's worth repeating again and again. We learn languages in order to communicate. And we learn languages best by communicating. Any questions?
Thank you, Martin. You gave us lots of food for thought. Any questions for Martin? No?
I want to ask if you're aware of any policy implementations in the light of the survey results.
Yes. There is one that Elaine mentioned right at the beginning, actually. In Portugal, they were not happy with their results, and they came to Cambridge and said, what can we do about this? Can we put in place an internationally certificated exam that would have a positive impact on learning in Portuguese schools? And they've now done that. So they've put in place, the last couple of years, an international exam which they hope will become a target for students and will have a positive impact on teaching and learning in that country. So yes, it has happened in some countries.
Do you have any proposal for formative training or teachers in improvement? Sorry, I forgot the word. For formative, would you wrote? Can you hear me?
Yeah. For teachers, for teacher training.
Yes, for teacher training. Yeah.
What can teachers learn from
yes,
this?
In the line of the implementation of further implementations, the conclusions, you have that formative. Formative for teachers, you know.
Yes, formative. So I think the most important message coming out of this actually is that languages are learned well in countries where teachers are encouraging communication in the classroom.
What? Can you repeat, please?
Yeah, I think maybe it's the microphone. Yeah, one of the most important lessons I think from the survey is that countries where languages are learned well is where teachers are encouraging communication in the classroom. So they're encouraging students to talk to each other. The teacher is always, or as much as possible, speaking the target language. So it's where the teachers are communicating and the students are communicating as much as possible in the classroom. I think it's probably the most obvious lesson for teachers themselves. A proposal for teacher training, I think that would have to possibly come from the countries themselves within each country. I think what the Commission now is encouraging is just that, actually. So more teacher training, more better teacher training, etc. Interestingly, in the results, aspects of teacher training there was no distinctive relationship with the results, actually. It was more other factors that contributed highly to the results.
Okay. Thank you very much, and sorry for the delay in the schedule. Thank you very much for coming.